What's going on, guys? JD's Custom Buggies. Forget the background noise. We got some work going on in the shop over there. So I have a motor here that was sent to us from a customer. Basically, come out of American SPORTWORKS carbide, and this is the same motor that you'll find in your like HAMMERHEAD GTS and your TRAILMASTer 150cc buggy. So had a bit of a rod knock. He wasn't sure what it was, but upon taking it apart, he sent it here. Took it apart and had a lot of play in the rod bearing. So here's our new crank. Just to give you an idea what I'm talking about is, this is a brand new crank, never used. You can move this rod back and forth. You just barely feel it with your fingers. It has a little bit of play, and that's totally acceptable. I mean, that's the way they come right from the factory. But there gets to be a point where there's tolerance, and how they measure is they stick a feeler gauge in here, and I can't remember what the number is in thousands, but you can stick a feeler gauge in the side of the rod, and if you can get the feeler gauge past a certain point, then it's past its tolerance. It's time to replace the crank. Well, we didn't need to do this on this crank. It had a lot of wiggle right from the get. So this is basically going to be a ground up build on this motor. Cases have already been cleaned and everything. So figure we just go through the step by step. I'm going to go ahead and assemble this, and figure just for those people who've never seen this done before or whatnot. So I mean, this might not be the most detailed video in the world. I'm just going to wrap as I'm going through it and try and point the camera in the right direction. Just because I'm kind of pressed for time and we need to get these motors done and back to the customer. So figure I'd just take the opportunity. So those people who haven't really seen the inside of these motors or whatnot, which can be intimidating if you've never seen them. Anything that we don't know about can be intimidating. So I figure kind of give you some insight, and we'll just go through and get this assembled and get it back to the customer as soon as we can. So we're going to start with the bottom end, obviously. So give me a second. I'm going to turn around here, try and point this camera in the right direction for us, and I'll try and keep an eye on the screen so at least everything is kind of in view. So here's our motor. This is basically the main part of the case. The transmission's still intact, still there. Everything seems to be running smooth. We are going to drain the fluids and change the fluids in it. So what we need to do is install the crank. Now what's kind of cool about this is normally I would have to get some blocks of wood. I would sit this crank, if this was a typical GY6 motor, I would sit this sideways and would have to feed in our timing chain in here to the timing chain galley, which is this guy right here, and then I would have to drop the crank in and basically try and get this timing chain to fit around the sprocket. We don't really have to do that because on these motors there is an access panel. If you notice here, there's a plate that goes there, and you'll see that soon enough. But we can put this timing chain in at any time, and that's the nice part about these motors. Is there's one big advantage as far as rebuild, maintenance, and whatnot, is that you're able to change the timing chain without splitting the cases, and that's kind of a unique feature about this motor, which is nice. It's well thought out. So now, sometimes with new most of the time with new cases and new crank, I basically end up heating this bearing journal up. We're going to see if that's the case with this. This might just slide right in. So just to give you just a point of reference, with these cranks for this particular motor, they are different. So you have two different size bearings. If you notice this bearing, it's hard to tell because you're looking at, but one side is bigger than the other. If this was a typical GY6 crank, two things would differentiate it right off the bat. Number one, the bearing that you see on this side would also be on this side, so they'd be the matching. They'd be the same size. Okay, probably you can see it from that angle. You can see one bearing's a little taller than the other. The other unique feature about this is because of the access panel for the timing chain. If this was a typical GY6 crank, there would be a bit of a taper here, and then there's like a kickstart gear that goes behind here. It goes, I'm sorry, let me It's a bit of a taper here. It goes through the crank, and then it would go through an oil seal. And then you would, before you put on your variator, you would slip on the kickstart gear. Now, we don't use the kickstarters for the buggies because they're electric start. But what that kickstart gear would do would basically space the variator where it needs to be to line up with the clutch. In this case, they milled a step into the crank, so basically the variator just, this fatter part sticks through the seal, and then the variator just rests against that. So doesn't need to be, we don't need a kickstart gear, we don't need to be spaced, it's already incorporated into the crank. So let's see how we fit. I'm looking to just try and slide this in. We don't want to, and I might end up heating it up if it doesn't quite. Nope, she went right in. So we got this side of the crank in. Okay. Now I am going to turn it a bit sideways here. Now again, if this was a typical GY6, we'd be sideways fiddling with our timing chain because we wouldn't have the access that we have with this motor. We don't need to do that. So what I'm going to do is go grab the other case half, and then we're going to mate our two case halves together and then work our way basically outwards. Alright, so I did turn it sideways, and the reason why I'm doing this is because we're going to put our gasket on. What I like to do, so I'm kind of particular about the gaskets I use in my builds, especially for customers and whatnot. So I like to use these NCY or SSPG gasket kits. I like the material better. It seems a little hardier, and sizing it up. So dowel pins ended up in this half of the case. Now, if they don't come out, I'm going to leave them in there. Yeah, they're going to stick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the gasket on this side and then lay it over. The other thing I usually do on center gaskets is I use Halamar blue. And it's basically, it's not an RTB, nothing like that, but because these cases have been old, you know, or used, it is a gasket sealant. So what it does is kind of helps smooth out, so if there's any imperfections in the cases, this will kind of take up the gap and help the gasket out with any imperfections. Oops. Gets a little messy sometimes. So just go around the perimeter real light. Actually, cleanup is not bad with this either. If you get it on your fingers, it'll wash right off. Kind of nice. And where it originated from is they use these on aircraft engines. They use this stuff a lot on aircraft engines. So what I'm trying to do is just use my finger to just get an even coat around the whole thing. It's not necessary. This is, like I said, this is just something that I like to do. I had a couple of gasket failures over the last, couple of years, so nothing worse than having to tear a motor apart just to replace one gasket, especially when it's the first gasket that you put in the motor. I'm going to go ahead and dabble some on the other side. Set my gasket. I'll lay it over. Good, and we're all the way around. It's also nice about the HAMMERHEAD, actually you can line the holes up and it keeps everything from shifting or moving. I've seen, I've got motors in here where, you know, gaskets have shifted or whatnot, and somebody missed a bolt hole. Like for instance, this center gasket here would kind of get inside on one bolt hole and cause it to leak and whatnot. I like to drop a couple bolts in all the way around to make sure that my holes line up. And I'm doing this backward to what I usually do. So usually I have the gasket on the bottom. So we're going to make sure. Okay, we are together, both halves. So as I was saying, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the longer bolts here. I'm going to drop them in. I'm just going to finger tighten, make sure they grab. So I know that is lined up. I know that is lined up. And I know that is lined up. So. Alright. I'm looking for, just because I kind of know my bolts. With this case here, it has there's two holes in the center. Well, I'm sorry, one hole here in the center, and then one hole right in front of the cylinder over here. Those are the only two that hold that case half together. Now when you put the other cover on and run these bolts through, then they will mate everything and sandwich everything up. But for right now, we just have these two. And what I'm looking for. T-handle. Alright, so I like using the T-handle over ratchet and everything when I'm doing assembly. It's a little bit slower, but you can get a real feel for what we're doing. There we go. And pop the socket off that thing. The other one. This way you know, just kind of feel the point where you don't want to over tighten it. Perfect. Alright, so we got our two case halves together. We got our oil pump. Now, the most important thing you got to remember about the oil pump is very, very lightly, if you look at it, and I don't know, is that focusing in? Yeah. So there's an arrow that's pointing, and that arrow faces up. But just make sure that that arrow is facing upwards toward the top of the motor, because that is, if you put it upside down, you will not have oil flow. So you might want to bring the camera over here. Alright, so as you can see, the arrow is pointing up. And find the two appropriate length bolts. There's one. It should be this one or that one. Nope, too short. Okay. One. Two. T-handle. Okay. Next we're going to put on our oil pump chain. That oil pump chain goes on a sprocket and on this peg. Now this peg will spin and drop in. Peg also has a flat spot at the top. So the goal is that sprocket will lock into that flat spot, and that's when you tighten your nut down. So what you want to do is leave that in there like that, and then get our sprocket. It goes around the looks like 3 sets of teeth on the crank, and you're going for the middle one. Okay. And then you line it up, and we are there. We're on a flat spot. Grab our nut. And looking for the bit. There it is. And that guy will be a 10mm, and the best way to do it is just grab the crank rod, keep the motor from spinning, just hit it a little bit. Now be careful when you pull up on the impact, because you can pull the sprocket right out and then you'll have to redo the whole thing. Alright, and then that shield actually keeps this sprocket from ever coming out. So this kind of serves a purpose. So it'll work. Okay, this is our starter idler gear. Basically it parks right there, and then when your starter, you notice this this cog right here, that's what your starter is going to be turning. And what it does is it turns the starter clutch. Now this is a starter clutch. Some people call it a sprag clutch, but it'll spin free one way, but then grabs when you go the other way, and that's basically what your starter is doing. Is we're turning it this way, which turns the whole clutch, which turns this crankshaft. Crankshaft's got 2 keyways on it, one's for the flywheel, which will come into play after we put on the cover, but this bottom Woodruff key is for the starter clutch. I'm kind of doing this backwards, but there we go. And then she just kind of locks into place. So basically what's going on is when a starter turns, it turns the whole crankshaft. But if you turn it the other way, she spins free. And that's so if you turn the key, or while it's running, that it won't hang up like you do with your car. And sometimes in the old cars you used to hit the start key while it was running and you hear a god awful sound. Well, that kind of prevents that. All right. There is. That is our starter clutch nut. Now there is a tool that removes and replaces it. I'm not seeing the starter clutch nut washer, so I'll just grab a new one. See the big flat washer right there? Yes. Get the washer first. Then we get our starter clutch nut. Now our starter clutch nut is reverse thread. Right in front of me. This is our starter clutch nut tool. And this needs to be put on with an impact. And you'll want to hold the crankshaft again. Okay. And you'll want to make sure that your impact gun is in reverse. That's basically all it takes right there. That is everything that is in that portion of the motor. Alright, so we got our gasket on, dowel pins are set. This is the cover that the stator is going to sit on. We got a new oil seal in there. Okay. Got our stator. Flywheel. Now there's just a big magnet, so when they come packaged, this thing is inside there, but you don't want any like loose scrap metal laying around these things when you're putting them in, because they will pick everything up around it. Alright, there is a ridge here. If you notice, it's got a whole circular, it looks like what do they call them, crop circles? So we got like this whole crop circle thing going on the cover. And if you notice, there's a little gap there, and you kind of want to make sure that your wires for your stator lay in there so it does not get pinched on that crop circle looking thing. So usually the wires go to the front, you lay her in there, and then kind of do some finagling. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make sure our wire's here. Get our little grommet, and the grommet goes right in this little notch. Okay, and this is our trigger. What the trigger does is, so this is all part of the charging system here, all these coils and everything. It runs like a generator. As this magnet flows around here, it generates AC electricity. This magnet here, or this is actually the magnet on a pickup, but this little thing here is basically passes under the pickup, and that is when it sends a signal, and this signal here through this trigger wire goes to the CDI, and then comes out of the CDI and goes to the coil. And all this has to do with basically when to fire the spark plug. So you got two whole little separate apparatuses going on in the stator. So what we want to do is, I'm just leaving my wire up behind, and we just want my wires out of the way. Alright, I'm going to put the two little, now these are the only two, they're M5 bolts, and they're the only two in the whole motor. Got one here. I need to grab another. Yeah. So every other bolt on the motor for the most part is an M6. These are M5s, they're a little thinner. The last thing you ever want to do is try and put these on with an impact, even a little electric impact, because it does not take much to break one of these guys off in this cover. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to send it home yet and really tighten it down, but I am going to get it to where it's going to sit there and retain the wires. And before I set this in place, I want to make sure that, again, my wire is not getting pinched on one of them crop circle ridges. And two of the right length bolts here. there's 2. Now, that little strap, these 2 case bolts go in, and that strap basically sits right in there to hold your wire down. And we're going to be able to slip that in there. I can move the stator a little bit. So when these go down, and that will hold the wire into place. What I'd like to do is I put a little Loctite on these so they don't back off. So let me get all that back out. I'll leave the strap down in it. And I thought I had some blue Loctite, but maybe not. Use a little bit of red. The reason why I do this is because it has happened, and it's happened to me, where these bolts have backed out a little bit, enough to cause an oil leak. Fortunately, in my case one time, on a race not too long ago, I was able to tighten up the bolts and stop a gusher and got lucky. That'll do you. Go ahead and set these down first. I'm going to tight just snug right now. I'm going to get my other bolts in there. Again, snug up the trigger. Get my other bolts for around the case. So these long bolts, not only are they holding this cover on, but they're kind of sandwiching all 3 pieces of the case here. Now the longer ones are going to go down at the bottom. Make sure I got all 3 of these are the same. There should be 2 longer ones that stick out. Found the other one. You
want to give a shot? Different lengths?
Yeah. So that's going to be the difference in length between these 2 bolts, and there will be 2 of these. And they go right down at the bottom because that's the thickest part of the motor right there. And the rest of them so make sure I got the right ones in there. Yeah, this one's long. So that one goes there. That one goes there. And what I'm doing, I'm just matching them up right now. And the short one goes here. If you notice, they basically all stick up around the same length off the, and that's what I'm doing to judge what hole, what bolt goes in what hole. They should all stick up about, I guess it's like a fat 1/4 inch. It's probably a little more than a 1/4. These 2 are in my head. So what I'm going to do now is, now that I got them on the right holes, I need one right at the top here. I'm going to start on one side and I'm going to work my way around in a circle. I'll do this 2 or 3 times. The first time around, I'll just make sure they all seem like they're about the same amount snug. And then I'll, next 2 times I'll start really hammering down on it a little bit. I'll check that one, yeah. That one up on the dowel pin. Snug. I can put Stator down. You got your keyway, you got your woodruff key, you just line it up. Now remember, it's magnetic, so it's going to want to snatch it right out of your hand, but that's it, and she'll drop right in. As long as you have it lined up. Actually, got a 17 on there already. Okay. Something on with an impact. Can grab me an NCY fan. Alright. We're gonna put our fan on and flip the motor. We're gonna put our timing chain in our cover on. And or at least get our timing chain set. And then we'll conclude this half. In the next video we will put on the top end. Four fan bolts. length chain. Alright, so we were talking about our access panel. On a normal GY6 you wouldn't have this luxury here. So, like we kind of said at the beginning of the video, that would be the first thing, the timing chain is the first thing that goes in. On this motor, it doesn't have to be the first thing that goes in. So a 45, now 45 link, sometimes you shop for them and they will, I get a lot of phone calls about, I don't know what timing chain, I see 90 link and this and that. Well, what it is they're counting the pins. You'll see that a lot on like Amazon, eBay and stuff like that. Take a slinky. So, but the truth of the matter is, it's 90 pins, it's 45 links. Just gotta be smarter than the timing chain. This is too funny. So, yeah, there's 45 links on there, and then there's 2 pins per link, so that's your 90. That's where you're getting your 90, that number from. So you can slip this through here. Actually, it's easier yet. Put it around your crank. Take it out up here. And that's it. And then that access panel will go over that. And basically your timing chain is installed. So that's going to do it for this. This will be like part 1. Do part 2. We'll finish installing our cover. We'll do the whole top end for you. And hopefully this is enough for you to chew on for the moment. But this is the bottom end. This is like, once this is complete, this is what you would designate as the short block. And the short block is basically a motor that is half assembled minus the front end. You'll see that a lot, like even with cars. The short block is basically the block with the cranks and piston and all the parts in it, except for basically from the head intake manifold up. So right now we've got our short block done, and then we'll get into the top end. We'll get into some of the clutching install and whatnot as we're doing it. But this thing will be done tomorrow. So part 2. Tune back in. If you need parts, go to gotbuggies.com. You can follow MBX on Facebook if you would like to follow the racing. And until next time, I want to thank you guys a lot. Have a good one.